Good morning, everyone. Dear students, let's continue the chapter Poets and Pancakes by Ashoka Mitran. In the previous lecture, we read about Kothamangalam Subbu. Subbu is described as a many-sided genius. He had many qualities. He had the ability to be cheerful all the times. He was very loyal to the boss. He seemed to be tailor-made for films. He had a solution for even the most difficult situation. He could write great poetry, but he deliberately chose to write for the masses. He was an amazing actor. He was very liberal in entertaining anyone who came to his house. But even such a liberal person had his enemies. Subbu was very close to the boss, so most of the people were jealous of him. Some called him a sycophant. The office boy of the makeup department held Subbu responsible for all his woes and troubles. Let's continue. You saw Subbu always with the boss, but in the attendance rolls, he was grouped under a department called the story department, comprising a lawyer and an assembly of writers and poets. Though Subbu was near the boss, but in attendance register, he was grouped in a department called the story department, in which a lawyer and an assembly of writers and poets was there. The lawyer was also officially known as the legal advisor, but everybody referred to him as the opposite. Though the lawyer was legal advisor, but he did everything opposite to his profession. An extremely talented actress, who was also extremely temperamental, once blew over the sets. Sets means stage, blew over means became angry. Once an intelligent girl, who was extremely temperamental, became angry on the stage. While everybody stood stunned, the lawyer quietly switched on the recording equipment. Everybody was surprised at her anger. But the lawyer switched on the recording equipment. When the actress paused for breath, the lawyer said to her, "1 minute please," and played back the recording. When the girl took a pause, the lawyer played the recording. There was nothing incriminating or unmentionably foul about the actress tirade against the producer. Tirade means speech. Incriminating means foul. Though there was nothing wrong in that speech against the producer, but when she heard her voice again through the sound equipment, she was struck dumb. Struck dumb means very surprised. The girl was very surprised at listening her own voice. A girl from the countryside, she hadn't gone through all the stages of worldly experience that generally precede a position of importance and sophistication that she had found herself catapulted into. Because the girl belonged to the rural background, she hadn't the worldly experience of such type. She never quite recovered from the terror she felt that day. There was the end of a brief and brilliant acting career. The legal advisor, who was also a member of the story department, had unwittingly brought about that sad end. The lawyer, who was there in the story department, unwittingly means without thinking, he had brought a sad end to the brilliant career of that actress. While every other member of the department wore a khadi and dhoti and a slightly oversized and clumsily tailored white khadi shirt, the legal advisor wore pants and a tie and sometimes a coat that looked like a coat of mail. Though other members of the Gemini studio wore a khadi dhoti and clumsily tailored shirt, the legal advisor used to wear pants and tie and sometimes coat also, which appeared to be a safety protection. Often he looked alone and helpless, a man of cold logic in the crowd of dreamers. Though the members of Gemini studio were lively, he appeared to be alone only. A neutral man in an assembly of Gandhitis and Khaditis. Most of the members discussed about Gandhi and Khadi, but he appeared neutral. Like so many of those who were close to the boss, he was allowed to produce a film, and though a lot of raw stock and pancake were used on it, not much came of the film. Though the lawyer was not near the boss, even then he was allowed to produce a film. Though so much pancakes and material was used, but the film was a failure. That one day the boss closed down the story department, and this was perhaps the only instance in all human history when a lawyer lost his job because the poets were asked to go home. And when the film was a flop, the story department was closed, and humorously, the author says that it was only for the first time when a lawyer had to lose his job. Gemini Studio was the favorite haunt of poets like S.D.S. Yogir, Sangu Subramanyam, Krishna Shastri, and Harindranath Chattopadhyay. So many poets used to come there. It had an excellent mess which supplied good coffee at all times of the day and for most parts of the night. It had a mess which used to supply coffee throughout the day. Those were the days when Congress rule means prohibition and meeting over a cup of coffee was rather satisfying entertainment. Those days, Congress rule was there, and if someone met on a cup of coffee, it was an entertaining pastime. Barring the office boy and a couple of clerks, everyone else at the stadium radiated leisure, studio, and a prerequisite for poetry. Barring means except the office boy and a couple of clerks. Everyone used to enjoy leisure, which was required for poetry. Most of them wore khadi and worshipped Gandhi, but beyond that, they had not the faintest appreciation for political thought of any kind. Though they used to wear khadi and they appreciated Gandhiji, except that they had no familiarity with politics. Naturally, they were all averse to the term communism. They were not in favor of communism. A communist was a godless man. He had no filial or conjugal love. He had no compunction about killing his own parents or children. He was always out to cause and spread unrest and violence among innocent and ignorant people. According to the people at Gemini Studio, a communist man was a godless man. He had no love for his wife or husband, or no love with children, or love of children with their parents. Compunction means pity and sympathy. They had no pity and sympathy. The children killed their own parents and the parents killed their children if they indulged in communism. A communist man was always ready to spread unrest and violence among innocent people. Such notion which prevailed everywhere in South India at that time also naturally floated about vaguely among the khadi-clad poets of Gemini Studio. The notion of communism was spread in South at that time, and the same idea came here where khadi-clad people were there. Evidence of it was soon forthcoming. It appeared very soon that what they thought about communism. When Frank Buckman's Moral Rearmament Army, some 200 strong, visited Madras sometimes in 1952. In 1952, a group of 200 people named Moral Rearmament Army reached Gemini Studio. They couldn't have found a warmer host in India than the Gemini Studio. They were welcomed warmly. Someone called the group an international circus, and they weren't very good at trapeze, and their acquaintance with animals was only at the dinner table. They were not good at trapeze means kalabazi, and their familiarity with animals was not so much. But they presented two plays in the most professional manner. Their Jodham Valley and The Forgotten Factor ran several shows in Madras, and along with the other citizens of the city, the Gemini family of 600 saw the plays over and over again. They played two plays on the stage. One was Jotham Valley and another was The Forgotten Factor. So many shows of these plays were played on the stage. The messages of the plays were usually plain and simple homily, but the sets and costumes were first rate, though the messages were very common. But their stage setup and their costumes were very wonderful. Madras and the Tamil drama community were terribly impressed for some years. Almost all Tamil plays had a scene of sunrise and sunset in the manner of Jodham Valley, with a bare stage, a white background curtain, and a tune played on the flute. For so many plays in Tamil, the same setup was adopted. It was the scene of sunrise and sunset, a white background was there, and a tune was played on flute. It was some years later that I learned that the Moral Rearmament Army was a kind of counter movement to international communism, and the big bosses of Madras like Mr. Watson simply played into their hands. The author was familiar with the group after so many years when he learned that it was a group against international communism, and big bosses just like Mr. Vasan, who was the head of Gemini Studio, played in their hands. I am not sure, however, that this was indeed the case, for the unchangeable aspect of these big bosses and their enterprise remained the same. Moral rearmament army or no moral rearmament army, international communism or no international communism, the staff of Gemini Studio had a nice time hosting 200 people of all hues and size of at least 20 nationalities. Those 200 people of Moral Rearmament Army belonged to various nationalities. They were of different colors and size. The members at Gemini Studio entertained a lot with them. It was such a change for the usual collection of crowd players waiting to be slapped with thick layers of makeup by the office boy in the makeup department, because usually the members at Gemini Studio used to wait for the office boy that their faces to be slapped with the paint to be presented on the screen. It was a nice change. A few months later, the telephone lines of the big bosses of Madras burst, and once again, we at Gemini Studio cleared a whole shooting stage to welcome another visitor. When Moral Rearmament Army had gone, another visitor came, and the whole stage was cleared to welcome that visitor. All they said was that he was a poet from England. It was heard that he was a poet from England. The only poets from England the simple Gemini staff knew or heard of were Wordsworth, Tennyson. The more literate ones knew Keats, Shelley and Byron, and one or two might have faintly come to know of someone by the name Eliot. Who was the poet visiting the Gemini Studio now? The people at Gemini Studio had heard the names of Wordsworth, Tennyson, Keats, Shelley, Byron, and Eliot. They were surprised who that poet was. He is not a poet, he is an editor. That's why the boss is giving him a big reception. Vasan was also the editor of the popular Tamil weekly Anand Viketan. They thought that he was not a poet but he was an editor, because Vasan, the head of the Gemini Studio, who himself also was the editor of a popular Tamil weekly Anand Viketan, he was giving a warm welcome to that man. He wasn't the editor of any of the known names of British publications in Madras. Then it was known that he was not the editor of some famous magazine. That's those known at the Gemini Studio. Since the top men of the Hindu were taking the initiative, the surmise was that the poet was the editor of a daily. Surmise means guess. Because the members of the Hindu were taking the initiative, so it was guessed that he was the editor of a daily, but not from the Manchester Guardian or the London Times. But he was not the editor of the Manchester Guardian or the London Times. That was all that even the most well-informed among us knew. Only this was known to those people at Gemini Studio. At last, around 4 in the afternoon, the poet or the editor arrived. He was a tall man, very English, very serious, and of course very unknown to all of us. At 4 o'clock, the man came to the stage. He was tall, his look was English, and he was serious, and he was unknown to all the members of Gemini Studio. Battling with half a dozen pedestal fans on the shooting stage, the boss read out a long speech. He was fighting with the pedestal fans who were there on the stage. The boss started giving an extended lecture. It was obvious that he too knew precious little about the poet or the editor. It was confirmed that the boss, Mr. Vasan, was not very known to that man. The speech was all in the most general terms, and here and there it was peppered with words like freedom and democracy. Peppered means spread. The speech was general, but the words like freedom and democracy were spread here and there. Then the poet spoke. He couldn't have addressed a more dazed and silent audience. The audience was surprised. The audience was silent. No one knew what he was talking about, and his accent defeated any attempt to understand what he was saying. If they tried to understand something, but accent means mode of pronunciation. His way of speaking was such that they were not able to understand even a single word. The whole thing lasted about an hour. The speech continued for an hour. Then the poet left and we all dispersed in utter bafflement. Utter bafflement means total confusion. Dispersed means went here and there. When the poet or the editor was gone, all the members of Gemini Studio went here and there with total confusion. What are we doing? What is an English poet doing in a film studio which makes Tamil films for the simplest sort of people? They were surprised that why the English poet had come here where people only indulged in Tamil films. People whose lives least afforded them the possibility of cultivating a taste for English poetry. The people at Gemini Studio had no taste for English poetry. The poet looked pretty baffled too. The poet or the editor was confused himself, for he too must have felt the sheer incongruity of his talk about the thrills and trivials of an English poet, because he was also thinking that he was inconsistent, not with the comparison of those people, because whatever he was speaking, people were not able to listen that. His visit remained an unexplained mystery. Mystery means secret. It remained only a secret why the man had come, what he wanted to say. The great prose writers of the world may not admit it, but my conviction grows stronger day after day. The prose writing is not and cannot be the true pursuit of a genius. The poet then criticizes prose writing. Because he is a prose writer, so he admits that it is his firm determination, conviction means determination, that prose writing is not the work of a genius man. Pursuit means work. Writing is not and cannot be the true pursuit of a genius. It is for the patient, persistent, preserving drudge with a heart so shrunken that nothing can break it. The prose writer must be patient. He must work continuously and without tiring. His heart should be so shrunken that no one could break it. Rejection slips don't mean a thing to him. If the slip is rejected, it doesn't matter to him. He at once sets about making a fresh copy. Then he starts writing another copy of long prose and sends it to another editor. Then he sends it to another editor, enclosing postage for the return of the manuscript. At the same time, he had to enclose postage, because if his manuscript is not accepted, that is returned in that envelope. It was for such people that the Hindu had published a tiny announcement in an insignificant corner of an unimportant page. A short story contest organized by a British periodical by the name The Encounter. The British periodical named The Encounter had suggested a prose writing competition made a tiny announcement in an unimportant corner of an unimportant page of the Hindu. The Encounter wasn't known commodity among the Gemini literati. Even literate people of Gemini Studio didn't know about the magazine The Encounter. I wanted to get an idea of the periodical before I spent a considerable sum in postage sending a manuscript to England. The author thought that he must go to the library and confirm about The Encounter before spending a much amount of money to send his manuscript. In those days, the British Council Library had an entrance with no long-winded signboards and notices to make you feel you were sneaking into a forbidden area. Laughingly, the author says that British Council Library had an entrance. There were no signboards, there were no notices. It appeared as if you were entering stealthily into a forbidden area. There were copies of The Encounter lying about in various degree of freshness. So many new copies of The Encounter were lying there, almost untouched by readers. When I read the editor's name, I heard a bell ringing in the shrunken heart. When the author saw the name of the editor, he felt that a bell was ringing in his heart, because it was the same person who had come to Gemini Studio to address the audience who had spoken for 1 hour. And I felt that he too would be singing the same song at the same time. Long lost brothers of Indian films discover each other by singing the same song of the first reel and in the final reel of the film. because that happened as it appears in Indian films, because the same song is sung in the beginning and the same is sung at the end of the film. Stephen Spender, that was his name. And years later, when I was out of Gemini Studio, I had much time but not much money. Anything at a reduced price attracted my attention. The author says that after so many years, when he left the Gemini Studio, he had much money. He hadn't much money, but he had sufficient time. So, if anything was available at reduced price, he at the same time purchased that. On the footpath in front of Madras Mount Road post office, there was a pile of brand new books for 50 paisa each. A pile of brand new books was there, and each book was available in 50 paisa. Actually, they were copies of the same book, an elegant paperback of American origin, special low priced student edition in connection with the 50th anniversary of Russian Revolution. As it was the 50th anniversary of Russian Revolution, that was why the book was sold at a reduced price for students only at 50 paisa each. I paid 50 paisa and picked up a copy of the book. The author purchased a book in 50 paisa, The God That Failed. 6 eminent men of letters in 6 separate essays described their journey into communism and their disillusioned return. In that book, eminent men of letters means educated people described their journey into communism and how disappointed they were when they came back. Andre Gelt, Richard Wright, Ignatius Silon, Arthur Koester, Louis Fisher, and Stephen Spender. Stephen Spender. Suddenly, the book assumed a tremendous significance. Suddenly, the book was very important for the author because Stephen Spender also had gone into communism and he also had returned disappointed, and he had expressed the same views of communism in his speech when he spoke for 1 hour. The poet who had visited Gemini Studio. In a moment, I felt a dark chamber of my mind lit up by a hazy illumination. Just then, the dark corner of the author's mind was brightened. The reaction to Stephen Spender at Gemini Studio was no longer a mystery. Now he was able to understand that the man had come there only to address them about communism and the disappointed return. The boss of the Gemini Studio may not have much to do with Spender's poetry, but not with his God that failed. Though the boss was not interested in his poetry, but he must have been interested in the book God That Failed. So here ends this chapter. Prepare the complete summary of this chapter.